Thank you. First, let me thank the organizers of this, I think, very important and very timely conference. I'm honored to be on a panel like this. And I know you all realize you're seeing not only the bipartisanship that was mentioned, but you're seeing leadership from our Congress, administrations past and present, from our military, and from our intelligence agencies and law enforcement. So you have an entire spectrum here that feels the same way. I think what you're going to hear up here is a continuous set of comments, much like you've heard already. The need to remove the MEK from this list of terrorists, the need to support the opposition groups and understand who they are. I want to begin a little bit by maybe giving a military perspective, because obviously that's my role and my experience in all this. I was the commander of U.S. Central Command, and before that the deputy commander back in the mid to late 90s to the year 2000, as was mentioned. We were following what was then called the dual containment policy, the dual containment of Iraq and Iran. What was confusing, I think, for me is I clearly understood the containment of Iraq and the measures we had to take. I didn't quite understand Iran, because although we had a stated policy, there weren't any clear containment measures we were involved in. 14 years ago, 1997, I think we began to believe something that has never come to pass, but we've clung to it since then. We began to believe with the election of President Hatami that maybe things would change. I remember President Clinton trying to get a grasp and understand if there was real change and a real opportunity. A number of us met here in this town from State Department, from Department of Defense and other agencies, looking to see what our judgments were on this, and looking to see what we could do to see if there would be a reciprocation. If you remember back in those days, we took small steps. We lifted the restrictions on carpets and pistachio nuts. We sent wrestlers and other kinds of social interactions. And unfortunately, there was no reciprocation. I have many friends in the region and maintain friendships with the senior leadership out there. I can tell you that those occasional trips by President Ahmadinejad and others across may on the surface appear to be friendly, but as one senior leader told me on the other side of the Gulf, there's always a point of making a final, not-so-veiled threat about support for the U.S. or alliances or relationships and what that means in the region. It's clear that this regime in Iran has always sought to be a hegemon in that region, to be dominant in that region. And the activities of their intelligence service, the MOIS, the threats they've made, the support, as was mentioned, by other groups in the region that clearly are terrorist groups, continues on, unabated, even today. I'm shocked and surprised that we still chase this illusion that there can be a meaningful dialogue with the regime that has been described, even by our current Secretary of State, as not only religious fanatics, but the criminal activities of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. It has become a corrupt military regime. And the greatest influence is now become the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. It has become an oppressive military regime commingled with religious fanaticism. I can't imagine anything worse. And we have an opportunity, and we just had one when this opposition was in the streets, and we missed it. We put the mute button on. What is amazing about this opposition, and I've met with many dissidents from inside Iran that managed to get out and quietly meet and talk about the situation, what has impressed me the most is how great this movement is. It is not singular. It is not only political. It goes across the entire spectrum of Iranian society. Women's groups, journalists, ethnic groups, workers' groups. It represents every aspect of society that feels the pressure of this regime. Lack of freedom of speech, lack of the ability to fulfill their destiny, lack of a voice in their own political system. Lack of fairness in the way they're treated because of their ethnicity. And so we have a broad-based opposition movement, which usually means they'll be most successful because the entire society is displeased with the oppression they face. The opportunity was there and still is there to bring light, like happened in Poland, to this movement. Who are they? What is their suffering? Pressure from the world begins with putting a light on the kind of oppression that occurs and the actions of the opposition movement, the courageous action to resist it. We've missed that before. And we've got to change our policy and our attitudes toward the opposition. What was strange about that dual containment policy is how much we emphasized supporting the opposition in Iraq and the Iraqi community outside Iraq. And I would offer to you, sometimes we didn't make the best choices there. And they did not have the kind of support and the kind of credibility inside Iraq. It's exactly the opposite with the Iranian community, the diaspora community, those that are outside Iran, many of you in this audience. You are credible, you are connected, you are respected. And I'm amazed that we have not reached out and not even given a tenth of the support and credibility that we gave for those in Iraq. Dual containment made one thing on one side, and where it could have counted more, we were absent. We were fooled. We had that illusion that there could be meaningful dialogue. We chased that illusion, and it didn't work. We now find ourselves in the 0 to 60 policy mode. It's either dialogue or military action. And I believe there's something in between we need to think about more clearly. I don't believe this regime is that afraid of international pressures and sanctions, unlike what I think most of the world believes. I think it begins internally. They fear the opposition more than anything else, more than what we could bring, or from the international perspective. Secondly, they fear regional cooperation that isolates them. And here we have done a lousy job of working with the region to create the kind of security cooperation, the kind of assurances on security that would isolate Iran. Those trips across the Gulf to give those threats on the other side are done deliberately to try to prevent any kind of regional cooperation. I don't know of any leader in the region that doesn't see Iran as the biggest threat in the region. They may not say so publicly, but certainly they will privately, and some do say it publicly. They feel threatened. They see the weakness sometimes in the Western approach, the vacillation between a hard line and a soft line, and chasing this illusion of some kind of meaningful dialogue. I think we have to be very careful with several things. One is that the sanctions that ever get implemented and put in place do not hurt the people and do not in any way curtail the ability of the opposition to communicate, to organize, and to structure themselves in the right way. I think we need a policy that reaches out to the Iranian community outside Iran and work with them as the greatest conduit and connection to those inside Iran that are trying to fight for freedom and for their rights. I think we need to work within the region to create the kind of security cooperation and give the guarantees that we will be by their side should Iran threaten them in any way, that allows them to isolate this regime as a pariah in the region. There are many measures that could be taken before we start talking about military action. I don't think you ever take an option off the table. But look, as someone who has seen war many, many times, and as someone who has suffered and bled in war, and from someone who has seen the greatest sufferers in war, the civilian populations, I'm telling you that is a last resort. And that is something we want to avoid. The last thing we want to do is bring more pain to the Iranian people. We can see what happens in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Vietnam and elsewhere, when we resort to that as a measure before we've exhausted all others. So I believe there needs to be a fresh look at our policy. We need to examine that area between this sort of illusion of a meaningful dialogue and this continuous saber rattling which gets us nowhere. You have presented an opportunity. You have offered the opposition. No one is asking for money, military support, and guns. They're asking for a hand to be reached out, a light to be shined on what they're doing, support, use of the bully pulpit, working within the community, working within the region to make sure we bring about change. This regime would fear that more than any of the saber-rattling, any of the international sanctions threats that we could develop. And I think if we take anything away from this conference, it should be the importance of stressing a new approach to policy. Examine those middle areas. Quit resisting reaching out and grabbing the hand of the opposition, giving them legitimacy, credibility, and giving them an international and world stage where they can demonstrate the pressures that they're put under. I know that the panelists that will follow me and those that have gone before feel strongly about this. We've lived through it. We've seen some aspects of this. In my case, the military aspect. We have seen the actions that have been taken. We see every day the violence that's perpetrated by this regime, not only within Iran, but outside within the region. And not only against those in the region, but against our own people, our own troops, our own diplomats. And we have got to wake up and realize that we can no longer continue to tolerate this. And there are measures that can be taken now. Thank you very much for your support and for having a conference that addresses these issues.